The Christian Stran Podcast.
I'm honored to welcome everyone to the first Christian Stran podcast. I have a fantastic first guest here with whom I'm so excited to be speaking. Mary Roberson, a PhD, also known as Vaishnavi. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Wonderful. Okay, retired, a decorated career as a integrative clinical psychologist, including founding the first Palestinian-owned and operated children's psychiatry clinic in the 1990s, which I thought is such an incredible topic to dive into, considering the current events of today's climate. Is there anything you would like to say to start off?
Well, I didn't found the clinic. A man named Iyad El-Sarraj, a psychiatrist, founded the clinic. I just went there to teach because the people in the Gaza Strip didn't get any clinical training. At the time, I went there twice. It was during an intifada, and ironically, Netanyahu was in power at the time. And so the second time in particular was after George Bush's Gulf War. And so the economic conditions and the kind of mental health issues in the population were huge. There was a lot of despair and anxiety, trauma-related anxiety. You know, it was difficult for these people. They just had to recruit people who were educated, maybe not even so much in psychology, or just had the PhD, but no applied experience. So I went there to help them train their clinicians to work. We did case supervision and so on. And it was a very profound experience for me. And the first time I went there, I just was in total shock when I came back because, and I think a lot of people in the United States are experiencing this now, kind of the shock of understanding what our tax dollars were paying for.
Right.
And the misery of that it was creating in millions of people's lives. And so when I came back, and the first time I came back, I was like, I can't even talk about this for a while because I was so angry and upset. And anytime that kind of big change in perception happens, it's like your nervous system has to accommodate those changes. It's you know, it kind of creates anxiety in and of itself because it's, you know, something to digest almost. Right. And so that's when I decided to go back and help the Palestinian people as much as I could. And it wasn't free from repercussion. I interviewed a woman who was a Palestinian American, and she had moved here after the Nakba, 1948. And, you know, told her the story of her having been moved off of their property and forced out of her homeland. And I published it and got in some trouble over it.
Yeah. Would you mind getting into a little bit about the report that you were hired to do on the children and their nervous system?
That was the first time I went. I was a part of a team of mental health professionals who were going to write a report on the effects of the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank and occupied Jerusalem. What was the effects on the children there? Because they were growing up under occupation, and what was that going to do to the trauma of that? What was that going to do to their psychology? And of course, it does a lot. And we can see, because what is this, 33 years later, those people I was writing about
right now
are now, you know,
some of them probably are Hamas militants at this point,
maybe,
and they don't know
maybe.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's a correct way to handle all of that, but desperation
Absolutely.
and trauma can, make you do problematic things.
Hmm.
And I know, just as a psychologist, it's kind of like sometimes you, when you're in an abusive situation as a kid, you grow up to be a perpetrator.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Now, not all, and by the way, that's mostly the men grow up to be perpetrators, sometimes women, but mostly men, and not always.
Right.
Some men break that cycle, but essentially, it becomes part of your psychology then to kind of dehumanize potential other people so that you then turn around and victimize them.
Mhm. Right. And one reflection that's come to my mind a lot, I think I expressed it to you before, was that I grew up with ro- sort of, mild case of child abuse, right? And even just that the trauma that I endured as a young kid has stuck with me. I'll still sometimes have like a nightmare where I'm hiding from my father and I'm scared he's going to beat me up again, and so to think about how just a common case of, run of the mill, child abuse can lead to just long term issues that are really hard to fully alleviate. I can't imagine just that the thunderous sound of bombs destroying our homes and losing our family, and how that at a young age could just demolish somebody's mental well-being for I mean, possibly irreparably, right? And so that's something that's been heavy on my mind recently, is just the toll that this is taking on children. Obviously, if I know you're pretty prolific on Twitter, so I'm sure you haven't missed all of the really gruesome images that have come out where these children, you can tell, I know something that you specialize in is the effects on the nervous system. And you see these images of children that are just like their nervous system is just broken. They can't stop and that's just so heartbreaking to think about how um, what kind of future these children have. And we see the numbers of the casualties, but that's just the casualties of the direct violence, that people who are dying immediately from the warfare. But I mean the lives lost that are going to continue, these cycles of trauma in perpetuity is just, I mean, exponential, right? Um,
So not only that, but they're of course now corralled and being starved and dehydrated and
mhm.
not good water and so on. So this isn't over yet. And I will be quite honest with you. I'm always honest to the best of my ability. And I don't look at those images because, I mean, I'm just triggered by the thought of it because
Right.
I've seen it. And in a much, 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 much smaller scale.
Mhm.
But so it kind of triggers me back into that
Right.
space of, the kind of mind warp that you go through. How can any human being do this? And so I'll be honest, right now I have a lump in my throat,
Right.
even talking about it. So
Well,
excuse me.
you spent time in refugee camps as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Which, yeah, I requested actually to visit. I wanted, because I was into kind of both the alternative healing modes and clinical psychology. I requested to visit a healer type in the refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. And it was an interesting, I had taken with me a smudge stick, which is kind of a Native American cedar and sage to purify, with me to present as a gift. to this person, and it was quite an interesting visit because, of course, she accepted my gift with great honor, and then she did a blessing for me, and I stood before her like charcoal burner, and she would throw herbs on there, and she gave me a little packet of herbs wrapped in a paper with a verse from the Quran, and as a blessing for me. So it was a beautiful exchange. But also while I was there, you could see that, they were living, sometimes 9 people to a room. And, they have to like put their mattresses against the wall in order to
Yeah.
kind of live in this space. And there were open sewers. These refugee camps were built back in probably 1949, maybe, and really hadn't had any improvements. But also, even at that time, Netanyahu was engaging in what is a violation of international law in collective punishment. So if anybody was, in his mind, acting up, back then they were throwing stones.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that he would then perpetrate collective punishment by just mowing down a
Mhm.
whole row of their houses.
I've
Uh,
seen stories of that. Even a child threw a stone at a tank that was coming through their neighborhood, and they arrested the child on
I
terrorism
know.
charges.
So anyway, yeah, it's very sad. I'm very upset, and I don't look at the images because I know. I mean, I know from the descriptions
Yeah.
that they're
It's
horrendous.
yeah.
And I don't want to do that to my nervous system. It's not as though I don't know it's not. I do know it's happening, and so on. So that's just kind of where I stand on that.
Would you
Just
would you describe what's being done by Netanyahu currently as war crimes, or would you define it as a ethnic cleansing or a genocide? What's your personal take on that? I kind of feel as though the semantics of whether or not the term genocide directly fits the definition is almost irrelevant because it's functioning essentially as an ethnic cleansing at this point. But what are your thoughts on the war crimes? Do they count as genocidal, or what
I
is
don't
that
know.
relevant? Is that helpful
You know,
even to discuss? Part of
I'm
me
not
part of me
I'm
wants to
not
say
a lawyer, but I did kind of Google at some point, and I do it does fit the description of what UN defines as a war crime.
yes.
So I would love for him to end up being held accountable for the crimes against humanity that he is perpetrating.
Right. Could we dive
Oh,
into some about the Jewish peace groups that you got to be part of in Palestine?
yeah, on our visit there, we did. We had meetings with Jewish people who were essentially opposed to the occupation and what was going on in the occupied territories. And I can still remember this one man speaking about the effects of the IDF, who were perpetrating all of these kind of attacks on the Palestinian people, and or even just humiliating. I saw with my own eyes them humiliate the Palestinian people, um, and and so it's like if you're doing that and then during the day, and then you get in your Jeep and you go home for dinner, it doesn't just get turned off. And so this person in this Jewish peace group was talking about that there was increased domestic violence happening within the Israeli homes because it's just not easy to turn off that mentality. And then your own reaction to, something in your being has to kind of feel like this is not appropriate.
Mm.
And to have to cover that up and push it down, it's going to kind of, it seems to me, I just give I'm an optimist about humanity, and and that just kind of makes me think about the fact that given what the Jewish people experienced during the Holocaust, it's kind of like, how can they ignore? How can the people stand for this? But it's a lot more complicated than that. Back then, the settlers were, kind of tearing down Palestinian homes within the West Bank, for instance, and building a settlement. They had some settlements in Gaza at one time too. And then they put a perimeter around them and they protected them, and all of these sorts of things. And so what we called it back then was they were establishing, quote, facts on the ground, meaning they were staking out so that basically the West Bank was turning into Swiss cheese of
Right.
settlements,
Yeah.
like that. And so, and the United States government has never spoken out. I mean, I shouldn't say never, because I think that Carter may have spoken out, but we have never done anything to kind of confront the ever expansionist ideals of Jewish settlers who were trying to take over all of Israel, basically, the Zionists.
Well, when I look at the expansion that's been done in the settlements, the occupation, I am sometimes confused by the idea of a two-state solution. When I look at these pictures, I am not sure just logically how that could be governed as two states. The settlements are so like you described perfectly. It's like Swiss cheese, and so to me, when I hear, the most common solution that I hear called for is two states, but I mean, it would be like, this neighborhood is this state, and then that neighborhood is another state, and then the next neighborhood is this state again. It's just, I'm not sure exactly how that would work. Do you have any thoughts on two state versus a one state secular nation?
I think I would love to see us end up in a one state secular nation.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is, I'm not sure that the Palestinians outnumber
Mhm.
the people of more Jewish descent.
Mhm.
So they can't have a democracy, if they're going to call it a Jewish state. So the Jewish state idea has to go.
Yes.
And I think that's probably terrifying given all the drama of what has happened.
Yes.
So, I think that until consciousness changes,
Yes.
and we move toward kind of make a paradigm shift, because this conflict has been going on for thousands of years, frankly. I think.
Right.
And it's made worse by, Western intervention, hacking things up and trying to perpetrate their boundaries on the region, right? And so I think a step along the way may be a two-state solution until we can shift the consciousness enough that somehow we can, all get along, so to speak.
Territories there have been in conflict, as you said, for thousands of years. I saw someone recently that was describing it as like ever since the days of David and Isaac and Moses, they've been fighting over this land. And then, you read about it on Twitter for 10 minutes and think you're the expert. I actually wrote Marianne Williamson and said this. I think it just goes to show the tenacity of people's spirit when we see people losing their lives unjustly. I mean, whether our perceptions are correct or incorrect about what's causing the injustice, I mean, everyone in the world or anyone who's politically minded is so riled up by this and just infuriated and saddened. There's cause and harm principle. Some people think the cause is different, but everyone wants the harm to be alleviated. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure everyone, but Yes.
But there's some people
Most all people do.
some people who are definitely lining their pockets at the expense
Well,
of
and
thousands.
also, our current president has not called for a ceasefire, even though many of his staff and a lot of politicians are even beginning to go there. He mourns the death of Israeli babies, but I don't see him mourning the death of Palestinian babies. What is that? What is that?
Money.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I
Netanyahu-
mean, he's always been in the pockets of the corporations, and he still is. And that's why I joined you and being a volunteer for the Marianne Williamson campaign, because, even though we still have money in politics, she would like to get rid of that, for heaven's sake, so that our government and our political system is no longer owned by PACs and corporations. And I think that's it's courageous of her to run without taking any PAC money or corporate money, but she owes no one anything, and she's authentic and she speaks her truth. And I just have a great deal of admiration for her courage and tenacity at, kind of keeping on is the way I put it in this very difficult campaign.
Absolutely. And then we have, in our previous discussion, I wrote down that we described Netanyahu as a thug. And so we have, a Jewish man like Netanyahu who's a thug, and then we have a presidential candidate in America who's a Jewish woman who is, in my opinion, the polar opposite of a thug, just absolutely fighting for the people, no holds barred. And that's just very interesting how I think a lot of people are conflating. Sadly, there is kind of a rise in some anti-Semitic sentiments that you'll see online. I don't know how much it exists in the real world. I've encountered a few people that are openly anti-Semitic in the real world, but I feel like it's pretty rare at this point. Most people are very educated on what caused the Holocaust. And while there are people who are heads of the World Economic Forum who may be of Jewish descent and don't have the best interest of the masses at heart, I think there's this idea that all Jewish people are thugs. I think the conflation of a few bad actors in government and all Jewish peoples is also really harmful. And I think that's something that obviously Marianne is really conscious of, running as a Jew. She would be our first Jewish president.
And our first woman.
And our first woman.
Oh, I think I'd like to address one thing that you said, which is that, what is happening to these people is creating a hopeless thing in their nervous systems and psychology, what is happening to the Palestinian people. And so I would just like to talk a little bit about some nonprofit work I'm doing here in the United States.
Okay.
So I am a founding board member of an organization called the Alliance for Integrated Awareness, which is it's actually kind of a psychotherapy technique that very rapidly resolves trauma. There's some research being done on it that is giving positive results. So it's research-based. And it allows kind of these opposing parts of our psychology to come together and integrate using a technique called AAIT is its acronym.
Okay.
And it allows these parts to begin to kind of come together instead of being all every which way. They begin to integrate. And at some point, they actually collapse your own individual consciousness collapses into the field of pure awareness or pure consciousness. The unified field is what Einstein called it. And these theories that people are having about consciousness and what's happening at the quantum level of our manifestations as human beings, at that subatomic particle level of things, that you know, it can collapse into that field and unite, and the person can, you know, be relieved, basically. So it's fast, it's effective, it lasts, it's research based, and so you know, I have hope that consciousness is changing, because the more of us that do things like spiritual practice, which collapses our consciousness into that field of pure consciousness, it can create waves of coherence in the collective consciousness. So I always viewed myself as kind of a little bit of a monk. You know, I'm a really spiritual person, which I think most people on Twitter who sees my tweets, you know, probably don't quite imagine. Because I'm tough and creating you know, confronting certain people and putting forth a new vision. But, you know, and it's out there in the world, whereas I've meditated for 50 years now. And I've always viewed my work as being able to kind of work with people individually to help them come into contact with that higher aspect of who they are, kind of, and then take that out into the world, take that to make their decisions in their lives. But you know, I kind of got into this whole campaign stuff because I wanted to understand what is happening in the consciousness of people. And I wanted to do what I could to kind of transform it in that way, you know. And so it's consistent, but it's much more, I'm much more out there in the world right now than I usually have been. And so I guess, and that moves into kind of some astrology. I am a Vedic counselor, and what that means is that I've studied these Vedic sciences for, like I said, almost 50 years, and practice. You need both knowledge and experience to kind of evolve. And so, you know, one is kind of the whole system of yoga and understanding the philosophy. Another piece is Ayurveda, which translates as the science of life. It's how do we live our life in accordance with our own individual constitutional nature.
Yes.
But also how we live with the rhythms of nature outside of us. And, you know, it can make recommendations such as diet and lifestyle and so on. And then the third thing is my favorite, which is Vedic astrology, which was the first system of astrology. It's different than Western.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of the signs are pinned to where they are in the sky. Western kind of went down the Silk Road and developed on its own in Europe. And over time, they've kind of parted ways by about 24 degrees. But also because it's pinned to the sky and not to the sun and solstices and such.
Right. Right. I always
Season.
talk about my sun sign is Sagittarius, and then to find out that that's actually kind of off by about 20 something degrees is fascinating.
And so your sun sign in Vedic might be one sign back.
Yes.
And then also what's most important is the ascendant, what was on the eastern horizon at the time of our birth. And that determines what is your identity in this lifetime.
Right.
You know, what karmas are you going to start unfolding in your lifetime? You know, what you do comes back to you. And so we are kind of the stars are a map of what your karmas in this lifetime might be with your natal chart, but also there's kind of the way they unfold over time can be predictive, actually. And I guess what I'd like to say on a more inspirational note with regard to that is that just recently, a few weeks ago, the karmic nodes of the moon changed to the sign of Pisces and Virgo, which are kind of directly opposite. And what that means is this is affecting the whole planet. And the north node of the moon, being in Pisces, is a sign that is ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter is knowledge at its highest. Jupiter is knowledge and wisdom and the ability to discern the truth with a capital T. It's maybe about being a teacher. That kind of metaphysical aspect of knowledge and transcendent aspect of knowledge. At its mid-level, it's confusion, like what's happening here? I don't understand, and I'm not sure what to believe, and that sort of thing. And
that's
then
where a lot of us exist right now, I would say.
Yes, exactly. And then at its lower level, it is fundamentalism, rigid beliefs, inability to kind of be open enough to other, ways of seeing things, and being very judgmental and harsh, And I'm seeing that in response when people don't like what I say on Twitter, And that's, by the way, one thing I love about Mary Ann's campaign, that she urges us to stay in love and connection, not in fear and hate and disconnection and divisiveness. It is a practice. That's right. So anyway, so the nodes just changed to kind of light up this Jupiter Virgo. Now, Virgo is the opposite end. It's the southern node of the moon, and K2 it's called. And it's really about organizing your life and living in a healthy way and being practical and grounded. It's the opposite. Up here, we have the fish swimming in the ocean of spirituality at its best. Now we have to have something to ground that, right? In our everyday life. So they're both very important. And, the Rahu end is really about having experience. Karmic experiences are coming at this whole planet. What we've done is coming back to us, right? Climate, all kinds of different things. And so we have these external things coming at us that we need to kind of solve and burn through and learn from. But also the K2 end is like, what's going on the inside? How can we deepen our psychology, our emotions, the way we're thinking about things, our intuition, our spirituality, in order to kind of ground that? Yeah. So that's just one example. I think that it just changed. And as that changes, there's a little period, they call it Gandanta. It's gone over a certain knot, and it will basically create a little bit of emotional turmoil for a while. But soon that's going to diminish and people are going to start working it through. So I have a lot of hope. And Jupiter also is about hope and inspiration. And I have a lot of hope that those who are asleep and not paying attention and just trying to survive, survival is an issue right now, that they kind of wake up and be open to hearing other perspectives, and that we actually pull through this campaign and elect Marianne Williamson as first our Democratic nominee and eventually the president.
I would like to discuss Vaishnavi and so Vaishnavi, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
It comes from Sanskrit, and you told me it means the power of consciousness, right? I would like to ask just where did that name come from? What does that mean to you? And
So I went on a retreat in 1994 with a woman named nicknamed Amachi. She's the hugging saint from India. And she was in Rhode Island. And I went there, and essentially she gives darshan, which is a hug. And as she does, you can actually, I mean, she's just got so much spiritual energy that you can just feel the layers of ego just kind of melt away. But if you're on a retreat, you have the opportunity to ask her to give you a name. She doesn't always do it, by the way, so I was honored that she did. And she gave me this name that was written down, and she like slapped it on her third eye and gave it to her translator. And I was told the name Vaishnavi, and then he translated it as the power of consciousness. And I was just blown away by that, because that is that as you're kind of manifesting out of the unmanifest unified field, pure consciousness, there is a creative, intelligent energy, Shakti energy, that, you know, informs that process and is responsible for the manifestation of all that is. That's the power of consciousness. And I'm just sitting there just like an ordinary human being thinking, oh my God, how am I going to live up to this name? So,
Beautiful name.
So I just, you know, continued doing what I was doing, continued meditating and so on and so forth. And, you know, at some point I decided, okay, I'm going to have people speak it to me. And, you know, I felt like I'd lived up to it enough that I could use it as my upfront name. So most of the people in my life call me Vaishnavi. And in fact, one of my friends said, Mary Roberson, I remember her. She was very nice.
Mary Roberson, PhD, and then your Sanskrit given name was Vaishnavi, meaning power of consciousness. What is your perception as someone who's been a integrative psychologist and then someone who's very spiritually in tune with yourself? You know, you understand the scientific side as well as the spiritual side. What are your thoughts on people calling Marianne Williamson, you know, well, she's the magic crystal lady and I'm not listening to her.
Or woo-woo.
Woo,
That's
she's
another one.
The woo-woo crystal. And she's never really spoken about crystals at all, which is what I find so fascinating. I mean, she's talked about overarching spiritual themes that kind of transcend from each religion to the next in a really holistic way. What are your thoughts on that?
So I actually took a coaching experience with Marianne Williamson, which lasted about 15 months, almost every week, endeavoring to impart how she coaches people, right? And on an individual, because that's what she's done also, besides writing books and her activism and now her candidacy. She has worked individually with people. And, you know, it's what she does is she listens and empathizes a little, but then she goes, okay, now what's the solution inside her head? And what principle, you know, she operates out of A Course in Miracles, kind of, which has a lot of principles in it. Like the only thing that is really real is this moment. Otherwise, it's our construction of the past or our image of what the future might be. But what is real is right now. And again, it's about getting that person to collapse into that now moment. And by the way, into that field of pure consciousness, where is the home of all that is in creation and all knowledge. You know, so for me, one of the big issues is climate change. I mean, I can't believe everybody's just ignoring this. And pretty soon, there's probably going to be cities underwater and, you know, all kinds of wildfires, the temperature's going up, we're going to have food shortages and, you know.
It's already getting there in a lot of parts.
It's kind of like, this is an existential issue and no one else is willing to confront big oil and gas, right?
Exactly.
And so it comes down to this whole kind of, we need to get the power back into the hands of the people. I mean, to me, you know, sometimes you get these little polls, what's most important to you? And I just think, well, we're all going to die. You know, as I put it, the planet is going to live on, but we won't, or life will be, you know, full of suffering.
Yeah.
So to me, that is huge. That's a huge issue. And then, you know, the other one is using her Department of Peace kind of conceptualizations, and that's what I like too. You know, even toward the issue in the Gaza Strip, she has a plan. You know, that involves, you know, kind of a multilateral talks and so on and so forth, to create a just peace for all the people involved. So you can't have peace without justice. I know she often quotes Martin Luther King, who is my kind of social change inspiration throughout most of my life. I mean, I was alive when he was assassinated, and Kennedy was assassinated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. You know, I lived through all of that. It's like these beautiful people, and you know, so I'm in favor of building a beloved community. And you know, I have hopes that enough people will kind of wake up out of their cynicism and hopelessness and all of that that's been going on, that you know, it's kind of laid out there in the mindset of the status quo, is teaching people to kind of a form of learned helplessness.
It's apathy, complicity in this corrupt system, just a complacency toward the status quo. It's lethal. It's lethal.
Yeah.
Not good. Yeah.
So those are some reasons why I feel passionate. And, you know, I want to, of course, continue serving people in a more individual way. And I'm trying to create a way that I can multiply myself by doing some group things and building a community of people who want to get into the spiritual traditions and stuff.
Yes.
But I'll tell you, I've just been overtaken by my passion to help Marianne Williamson's campaign, because I just think it's the most important thing that I can do right now.
I believe it's a noble thing to do. People often argue with me that, oh, there's no way that she can win. It's an impossibility. And I feel as though, I mean, with that attitude, of course it is. But Marianne Williamson supporters are not blind to the fact that we are trying to change a system which is just deeply rooted in lots of money, power, and corruption. And we know that that's a nearly impossible task. But the difference is that we believe that there can be miracles if enough people, you know, change their perception. And so I'm hoping people will change their attitude. I see so many people who are online sympathetic toward Marianne Williamson and really appreciate the things she says and believe that she would be a great president, but they often follow those statements with, but she can't beat the DNC, you know, but she can't, you know, overcome this corrupt system. They're not going to let her. They won't allow it. So what is she doing? She's in the belly of the beast. And
that's right. So I wanted to, you know, just say about that, because of course my involvement with this campaign has made me realize what a beast it is to be in. And I just want to just say, you know, for people, she's primarying Joe Biden. And what that means is if she wins the primary, she will be the Democratic nominee. And, you know, a lot of people ask, well, why didn't she go third party? Well, she's a Democrat. She's an FDR Democrat, has been her whole life. And that's why she made that choice.
FDR, yeah.
And so, you know, here she is. There is another challenger in the race as well. And the DNC is doing some bad things, the anti-democratic things, in order to obstruct her being on the ballot. And then also, corporate media is kind of icing her out, blacking out television coverage. So it is a very difficult situation. And since she's accepting no PAC money, no corporate money, this is all on grassroots donations, and her average donation is quite small, like $25, $30. I don't remember what. So she's on a shoestring, whereas the DNC has like $100 million or something to spend on election. And so, it's very laudable, and I hope people sometimes will look into her platform, which covers about 25 issues or so. All of them very important. And, if you feel like it's something that you can get with, to donate $5 to her campaign, every little bit helps. So, I think it's important for us to support this effort that she has of number one, putting forth a different reality that is one where it's based in compassion for one another, that beloved community, building that. It's not going to happen right away because we have a lot of detractors out there, but standing the ground and doing the next right thing, making those decisions. I think she'll be very, very good at that. And then, support her in whatever way that you feel comfortable with after you look at her platform. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. What would you like to close with?
Yeah, I asked to do a Sanskrit chant. Sanskrit is a language, by the way, that has an effect just by its sounds. So I'm going to sing it in Sanskrit, and I'm going to have a short pause, and then I'll translate it for you in English, and then we'll say goodbye. Yeah.
Okay.
So the sound of the words actually communicates the meaning. Ramana Santu Nirbhya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May everyone be prosperous. May the peacemakers righteously rule the earth. Let the animals and people of wisdom be protected at all times. May all be blissful. May the rains come at the proper time. May the earth produce grains. May the world be free from famine. May the people of contemplation have no cause for fear. Om, peace, peace, peace.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. I hope that we can do this again sometime.